Hello, good evening, and welcome to our latest evening offering. I think the month is May. They tell me it is, but I find it hard to keep up with where we are at the moment, I have to say. So thank you for joining us. Just a few items of news to bring you up to speed with where we are. We are busy trying to prepare for the gradual ease down starting in May and continuing in June, which will enable us all to get out and about and join in a few more things as we get comfortable about it. So we hope that you will take advantage of that when we get there. A couple of us are meeting with Beccles Public Hall next week to discuss what we need to do to hold the June meeting there, which is also happens to be our AGM, but we're hoping to hold the meeting with the speaker there. Nonetheless, we're planning to email out all the AGM papers again this year, as we did last year, so members can cast their votes and we can announce the results and deal with any questions at the meeting on June 16th. That worked well last year, so I think we're going to do it this year. We got good participation and people seem to be happy to respond to the electronic stuff we send out. So hopefully you'll all do the same again. We hope that some people will be able to gather in person at the public hall when we hold that meeting, but we just need to have that meeting with the management there just to find out what they will require of us and whether we're comfortable with the process. So we will let you know in due course. We're still a few weeks away, so we've got a little bit of time. It's also good to hear that some groups are planning their return to whatever the new normal is. One of the walking groups gets going again in July, and so we would expect the regulations and rules to enable that to be quite a smooth operation, but I know we'll be well managed on that as always. We've also started the process to get a second cycling group in action. I was tempted to say to get a second cycling group up and running, but that didn't sound quite right, so I put in action instead. If you've approached Linda Ayres, who's the convener of the current cycling group, and you've been told or you believe you're on the waiting list, then we will have your details and we will email you about a get-together, probably on Zoom. If you haven't expressed that interest to Linda, then please just send me an email and I'll add you to the list and then be in touch over the next few days. Sadly, the Classical Music 2 group has closed. We hope that those members who wish to continue can slot into the other group, but I expect we'll be in touch with you about that. From the 17th of May, if Boris sticks to his plan, up to 6 members or 2 households will probably be able to meet indoors, no doubt with some requirements and restrictions. So I expect the weather will get much better then if we can meet indoors and people trying to play table tennis out in the gales and the torrential rain and hailstorms. So I'm sure that'll be more comfortable if you want to do that. So small groups can think about getting back together, but we'll need to consider the social distancing requirements and face masks, etc. And if any groups need help with venues, if, for instance, you'd rather meet in a room rather than your home if you're a small group, then please let us know and we'll help you sort that out. Just as I say, just get in touch with us. That's what we're here for. Although the venue for the meeting on June 16th still to be finalised, will we be in the public hall or will we not? We are planning to hold monthly meetings from July in the hall. We think we'll be nicely clear of the ease down announced in June, and so people will be a little bit more comfortable about going out. It may be that we have to have some regulations in force, but we'll see what we're told as we get nearer to the 21st of June. So enough of the news. Now I'm just going to say I'm very pleased this evening to welcome Mary Smith, who retired at a very young age from a position as head at a Maidstone school. Based on her book, A Schoolgirl's War, Mary tells a story of school life during World War II and features some fabulous artwork from the time. together with some anecdotes from wartime. As you're now familiar, if you have any questions, please use your Gmail account to ask it as normal, and we will field them at the end. So please do that. I'm hesitant again to say if you have any personal anecdotes living through the war, because I'm sure no one will remember it. But your parents may have told you all about it. So do share any experiences you've got. So without stealing any more of Mary's thunder, I am absolutely delighted to introduce Mary Smith.
Thank you very much indeed for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to talk to you. I was about to say to come and talk to you, but of course I haven't actually physically done that. As you heard, I was until recently head teacher of a large girls' secondary school in Kent. And while I was there, we made two absolutely fascinating discoveries. This is the first one. We discovered that one of the underground air raid shelters that had been dug for the girls during the war was in fact still there. Now, to call it a discovery is not quite correct, because we did know roughly where it had been, and also there was a set of concrete steps leading down to a wooden door, which was a bit of a clue. But at some point, I don't know why or when, somebody had chucked great lumps of concrete down these steps, so it was impossible to reach the door, to open it, to see if there was anything behind it. But in 2013, our curiosity got the better of us, and we decided we really did want to have a look. So we hired a contractor to come along and hoik all the concrete out of the way. Then we went down the steps in trepidation, obviously preceded by a county council health and safety executive member who had to check the air quality for us. And as I hope you can make out from that rather strange photograph, we discovered that the tunnels were pretty much intact. So we set them up as they would have looked during World War II. And I'm going to come back to that photograph a little bit later. And we started to invite primary school children down to have the experience of what it would have been like to have had a lesson in an underground tunnel during wartime. Now, some of you may already know this because you may have children in your families of the appropriate age, but the home front of World War II is on the primary school history curriculum. So every child in England and Wales will study World War II at some point during their primary school lives. So, of course, the local schools have been very keen to come and visit. We take the children, first of all, into a classroom in the main building. We give them a lesson about World War II. Partway through the lesson, the air raid siren goes, and they've already been taught that means complete silence, stand up, single file, out the back of the school, down the steps, into the tunnels, books out on their laps, and the lesson continues underground while we all wait for the all clear to sound. Even the school canteen get involved, and they put on a Second World War lunch for the children. In fact, at the beginning of the day, there are always one or two children who tell me they're a little bit nervous. And when I ask them why, it's never about going down into the tunnels. It's always about whether anyone's going to force them to eat cabbage or some other vegetable they've never encountered before. Well, that was the first discovery. And that was really, really exciting. I loved every minute of it. But actually, in the end, the second discovery for me was even more exciting. And it was all to do with this lady here. And her name was Helen Keane. And she was an art teacher at the school during World War II. And it turns out that she did a really rather remarkable thing. Now, we discovered this really rather remarkable thing that she did precisely because we had opened up the tunnels. Because having done so, we wanted to see if there was anything in the school about the school during World War II. So we went rummaging around in a very dusty old cupboard, which had archive on the door and hadn't been looked in for years. We found one or two interesting bits and pieces, but then under a whole pile of other stuff, we came across a large flat cardboard box, very dusty. So we shook the dust off, took the lid off, and this is what we found inside. Now, you might be able to see on your screen there that says War Diary, 1939 to 1946. Now, it's a big book. It's taller than an A3 sheet of paper, and it's also very thick. And it turns out that art teacher, Miss Keane, she set out as the war began to document the lives of schoolgirls and their teachers in paint and pencil. And she carried on throughout the war. And at the end, she must have gathered together all her paintings and drawings, stuck them into this book. The book was put in the box was put in the cupboard, and it was forgotten about. Now, to discover this was really exciting. We've shown it to the Imperial War Museum, and they say they don't think there's anything quite like it anywhere else in the country as a record of school life in wartime. So there really is something rather precious about it. As you can see, she's called it War Diary on the front cover, but on the inside front page, I think she's been very modest, because there she just refers to it as a scrapbook. And I don't think that does justice to what's inside this book. Well, to cut a long story short, after I retired, the current head teacher asked me if I was willing to put a book together featuring Miss Keene's paintings and drawings. And the original idea was that we would give a copy of the book to each of the primary schools that came to visit. But I hadn't got into this project very far before I felt, no, these lovely paintings deserve a broader audience than that. So I set out in the end to create a book for adults, but one that children could very definitely access too. I certainly wanted children to see these lovely paintings, but I also thought that adults would like the chance to do so. So I got stuck in straight away, and I have to say it was a fabulous project to fall into my lap as I retired. I ransacked the school archive, the local newspaper archive, the local libraries and museums archive. I went rummaging around in the Imperial War Museum research room. All of those things were useful, but there was one thing I did that was more useful than all of those put together. And that is that I set out to see if I could find any old girls. Those were girls who had been at the school during the war, who could remember it and tell me about it. And in the end, I managed to track down 53 of them. So I interviewed all of them, which was in itself a fabulous experience. So what I would like to do this evening is to tell you the story of this particular school during World War II, using Miss Keene's paintings and drawings. One or two of the photos we found as well, and one or two of the anecdotes. It is obviously about this particular school. You might be able to see at the top of Miss Keene's page there, in her beautiful calligraphic handwriting, the letters MGGS. Well, that stands for Maidstone Girls Grammar School. But I have absolutely no doubt that the story that's told by these paintings was replicated across the country. I know there were pockets of difference in different places, but I think that anybody who was at school during World War II, anywhere in the country, boy or girl, would find aspects of this story that resonate with their own experience. So we're going to start in 1938. And 1938 was a very good year for this school, and the main reason for that is that they were getting a brand new building. Now, this is a photograph we found in the archive of the building just as it was completed, and they were thrilled with it. They'd been really cramped in an old Victorian building, so to move up to this new site, they couldn't believe their luck with all the space that they had. It's an absolutely classic 1930s design as well. This is a comment I found in the school magazine of that year. At last, a dream has come true. We have a beautiful school to work in, a place built for happiness, sunshine, and peace. And I couldn't help feeling how ironic that was, a school built for peace. And they moved in September 38, obviously right in the middle of the Munich crisis. And as you could obviously calculate as well, they had only 1 year of peace to enjoy this beautiful new building before it was obvious that war was imminent. And the very first thing that happened to any of the girls at the school was that the oldest ones were contacted by the head teacher in the summer holidays of 1939 and instructed to go to the agricultural hall in the town to help with the arrival of evacuees. Now, these are two rather poor quality photographs from the local newspaper archive showing evacuee children arriving at Maidstone East Station from London. And they came in their hundreds and thousands. And this is a comment that one of the girls who was helping told me. Even as an 18-year-old, I was struck by how quiet the children were. They must have been petrified. They sat on the floor with walking space between the rows. The foster parents came and selected the child or children they fancied. At the end of the session, there were a few miserable, tired little wretches left. They were, I think, taken to a children's home, which seems a rather sad outcome for those particular children. And this photograph also shows evacuee children arriving, but as you can probably see, these are secondary school girls. Now, there is another secondary school which is important to this story. This may be a photograph of them, I don't know. But the school that I'm referring to, who must have looked very much like this as they arrived, was the King's Warren School from Plumstead. Now, those girls were put on a train on Saturday, September the 2nd, the day before war was declared, and sent to Maidstone. And the reason they were sent to the town was to share the brand new building with Maidstone girls. So there was a bit of an irony there as well. There were Maidstone girls thrilled with all the space they had in their new school. And then suddenly they had to take the 500 of them had to make room for 240 more girls from Plumstead. But the first thing that actually happened directly at the school was that the school couldn't open. Now, this is the first of Miss Keane's paintings that I'm showing you, and it's just a little painted sketch showing the entrance to the new building. And the reason the school couldn't open was that there were no shelters ready, and you weren't allowed to gather large numbers of children together if you didn't have enough shelter for them all. So the first thing the head teacher had to do at the beginning of that term was to write to all the parents to say, please do not send your daughter to school. Please wait until further notice. When I first heard that the schools were closed at the beginning of the war, I was really shocked. Of course, it doesn't seem quite so shocking now when we have so recently been back in that situation. But of course, in those days, they didn't have the benefit of the internet to help them out. So what happened was that a girl at home would wait for a postcard to arrive. And when this postcard came, it would have a date on it telling her when to come into school. It was obviously on some sort of rolling programme. But all that happened when she came into school is that she was given a lesson or two of maths and English and then given a whole pile of work and sent home again. And she would sit at home, do the work and wait for the next postcard. And that took about 3 weeks to arrive. So they were only going to school for an hour or two once every 3 weeks. And while all that was going on, gangs of men arrived at the school to dig the shelters. And this is Miss Keane's painting of the entrance to one of the shelters. And I'm fairly certain this is the one we've opened up at the back of the school, because Miss Keane was a very accurate painter, very precise. And I recognise those trees in the background. They're still there. But I said gangs of men turned up, but in fact, there weren't that many men available to do this work. So that's not really quite the right term. It did take them a long time. They dug 2 sets of shelters at the front of the school and another set at the back. And then they also reinforced some cloakrooms. So by the time they'd finished, there was enough shelter for all 500 Maidstone girls, all 240 King's Warren girls, and all the staff from both schools, including all the cooks and cleaners and other ancillary workers. But that wasn't actually ready until February 1940. So there was very much part-time schooling going on till then, and then they came back gradually as the shelters were ready, when of course it must have been very crowded. And while all that was happening, the girls themselves were being prepared for war. Now, I'm just about to show you a much better quality photograph from the local newspaper archive. I wonder if you can spot what gives it away that it's a wartime photograph. I'm sure some of you have spotted straight away the 2 gas masks hanging from the branch on the right-hand side. It's the girl on the left in the tree is the one that I've interviewed, the one with plasters on her knees. And she remembers very clearly playing in the orchards around the town when a local newspaper photographer happened to spy the 3 of them there and take that gorgeous photograph. And I think it beautifully illustrates that they have absorbed the message. You take your gas mask with you everywhere. And they were fined a penny if they ever forgot, which was a significant sum because it was the price of a Chelsea bun every day at school. So you might look at that picture and think, well, one of those girls is about to get into trouble because it looks as though there are 3 girls in the tree and only 2 gas masks. Well, don't worry. If you look down at the very bottom of the photograph there, you might just be able to spot on the right-hand side of the tree trunk the strap of another gas mask hanging there. So they have actually got 1 each. And I must share this with you as well. I was showing this photograph just before the first lockdown in a hall into a village somewhere close to here. And when I put it up, somebody called out from the back of the hall, "Oh, that's me." And it was the girl on the right-hand side of the photograph here, the one with the dark cardigan on. And she'd never seen this photograph before. So I was able to run her off a copy and send it to her. But even better than that, I was able to reintroduce Dorothy on the left to Hilary on the right. And they hadn't spoken to each other for more than 7 decades. And they had tea together just before lockdown came about, which felt a really nice thing to be able to do. Now, that art teacher I mentioned to you, Miss Keane, she had a bit of a sense of humour. And she liked to poke fun at all the instructions that came out to schools. And they came out in their bucket loads. And one of the instructions was, all children must be trained to work and play in their gas masks. This is what Miss Keane thought playing in a gas mask would have looked like. Now, these are only little tiny pencil sketches, so I hope you can see them. But in case you can't, I've just increased the size of the netball game there in the bottom left-hand corner, so you can see it a little bit more clearly. And if you've ever had a gas mask on, I'm sure you'll be aware that the idea of playing netball in it would be quite out of the question. I don't think they ever did any of those things. I think this was just Miss Keane's illustration of what it would have looked like had they followed that instruction. And the school was being prepared in other ways as well. I don't know if you remember from the very first quotation I read, this wasn't just a school built for peace, it was built for sunshine as well. And that meant there were a lot of windows. So they were putting up what they called blast walls or baffle walls outside some of the windows to protect the glass. That's literally just an extra wall outside some of the windows. And then this lovely painting also shows a preparation for war. Now, this wasn't actually painted until September 1940. You might just be able to see the date in the bottom right-hand corner there. And it was painted just before the start of the autumn term. So there are no girls at school at this time. And what it shows is teachers rushing down into the shelter during an air raid, because, of course, the war has been going for a year by this time and the Battle of Britain has begun. Can you see they're carrying rolls of stuff on their shoulders? Well, that's rolls of sticky netting that have been sent out to the schools in the summer holidays of 1940 for the teachers to come in their own time, cut up and stick all over the windows, obviously to stop any shattered glass falling in on the girls in the classrooms. And they've obviously been interrupted in that job by an air raid. So they're carrying it down into the shelter with them so they can go on cutting it up underground, ready to stick on the windows when the raid is over. And that must have happened a lot, because this painting is labelled by Miss Keane, Windows, Recurrent Incident in the Netting of. Now, I really like Miss Keane's paintings. You obviously don't have to agree with me, but this is a very typical example of her style. It's quite a simple style, very like this book illustrations I think you would get from that era. But I think there are three things about it that I'd point out about its charm. I mean, one is the lovely vibrant colours that she uses, and I hope those are showing up well on your screens this evening. And then secondly, I feel in a lot of her paintings, and this is a good example, she was very adept at capturing a sense of movement. I really do feel those teachers are rushing down into that shelter there. And then thirdly, they are absolutely packed full of detail. Now, I've had the luxury of poring over these pictures, but just to point out a couple of things here, you can probably see on the right-hand side there, a teacher has dropped some papers and another teacher is helping her to pick them up. And then if you're very eagle-eyed, you might have spotted that the lady in the middle, the one with the white dress with red spots on, is carrying a pair of scissors at a really unfortunate angle as she's rushing down into the shelter. So that's Miss Keane's painting of them rushing into the shelter, and this is Miss Keane's painting of what they were rushing into. And that looks a really dull little painting to begin with, but again, there is a lot of detail there. You can see the concrete planks that make up the walls of the shelter. You can see the bitumen between the planks to keep the moisture out. You can see the benches for the girls to sit on, and we found a lot of those still down there. And you can see a wooden dado rail that went all the way around the edge of the tunnels. We think that was to help the girls keep their backs off the cold concrete wall. And then you can also see a curtain. Now, behind the curtain was hidden a little tiny room. And in that room were hidden a pile of pickaxes and shovels. The reason for that probably being obvious, that if they got trapped down there, they would have had the wherewithal to dig themselves out. And also behind the curtain were two little curtained cubicles, each one with a bucket-type Elsan toilet in. Can't have been very nice to use. And then there's one other thing you can see in this painting, and that is at the back right-hand side of the picture, you can see the tunnel turns a corner. Well, that's because these tunnels that we've opened up at the back of the school, they are dug like a zigzag. So there are 6 zigzag tunnels, each one going off at right angles from the one before. And in each zig or zag, you could have fitted an entire class of girls. So there would be 30 girls coming towards the screen here, and then there would be 30 girls around the corner to the right, and then 30 girls around the next corner, and so on. So in the ones we've opened up at the back of the school, there would have been 180 girls sitting in their 6 tunnels with their 6 teachers in their 6 classes. So with 2 more sets of tunnels like that at the front and these reinforced cloakrooms, that's why there was room for everybody. But the tunnels were zigzagged like that because of a lesson learnt during World War One, and that is that blast goes in a straight line. So you dig the tunnels like that to stop that effect. I rather liked the way one of the old girls put this to me, though. She said this: the tunnels were zigzagged so that if a bomb fell on one section, it would only have wiped out that class. And now I'm going back to that photograph I showed you a little bit earlier. And there you can see several of the features that you've just seen in Miss Keene's painting. You can see the concrete planks that make up the walls and the ceiling of the shelter. You can just about see the bitumen between the planks. You can see the wooden benches for the girls to sit on. You can probably see that some of those are a little bit taller than others. The taller ones are the ones we found down there. We've just put a few extras in to make up the numbers. And you can see the wooden dado rail as well. Ignore the blackboard at the end, that's not original. I'll explain that in a minute, but you can probably also see that there's electric light down there. Now, when we first opened up these tunnels, we found a dead cable going all the way around the edge and some dead light bulbs. So we put in a new electricity supply to replace the one there, and we put the light bulbs back exactly where they had been. But we do know that the electricity only went into the tunnels 18 months into the war. So for the first 18 months, when they were used very heavily indeed, they were lit only by battery-operated lanterns. And there were just 2 lanterns per wall per tunnel. So it must have been very gloomy indeed. And the floor, by the way, is just earth. So that's what the tunnel looks like empty, or one of the tunnels. The next photograph I'm showing you is my personal favourite photograph this evening. I wonder if you can guess who these people are. Yes, they're actually some of the old girls that I interviewed for the project. After we'd finished all the research, we invited everybody who had helped to come back to school. We had a fabulous tea party in the school hall, and then we invited those that wanted to go back down into the tunnels. And that brave band of 13 went back and sat where they had last sat, well, anything between 75 and 80 years ago. Far more than 13 came back that afternoon, but they are all now in their 80s and 90s. And these tunnels are completely underground, so it's a long way down, and the steps are very steep. So some felt they couldn't manage the steps. But to have that lot down there was fabulous. As you can imagine, from my point of view, the stories just flowed between them as they reminisced. There's one other little detail I'd like to point out in this photograph, and because it always amuses me, and that is that the flash from my camera has beautifully illuminated top right-hand corner the slug trails on the walls, which I think gives you some idea of the atmosphere down there. But look how crowded that is, and there's only 13 of them. This is what it looks like with 30 modern schoolgirls down in the tunnels. And I'd be surprised if you can see anything more than about 10 faces, but there are 30 girls sitting there. Now, I've been a teacher for a very long time, and I have to say that this is the most difficult place that I have ever had to teach. Essentially, you have 2 big problems down here that you don't have in a main classroom. And the first of those is I have to bellow to make my voice heard down the far end of the tunnel. The tunnel just soaks up the noise. And of course, I've only ever been down there when there's been one class down there. Had I been down there during the war, I would have been bellowing down my tunnel. But then at the end of that, there'd have been another teacher bellowing at right angles down the next one. There were no doors between the tunnels, so we'd have heard each other's lessons all the time. And of course, why are we down there? We're down there because there's an air raid going on. So quite often there was the noise of aircraft outside, or worse, explosions around the school. So sometimes the noise must have been horrendous. And that's only the first of those 2 problems. The other one, I think, is rather well illustrated by this photograph, which is that I can't see them all. And if you're a teacher, you want to be able to see everybody, to see what they're up to. But of course, not only can I not see them, and in fact, when I've taken girls down there, it doesn't take them very long to work out that if they don't want my attention, all they have to do is to lean back slightly and they have vanished into the shadows. But also look at the bottom of the picture there. I hope this is showing up on your screens because this is a very dark photograph. But look how close all their shoes are. So there's no way I could get down between them to reach a particular girl to see what she was doing or give a bit of help. I would just have fallen all over their feet and landed in their laps. Or so I thought. Then I took the old girls down that day to them and I said to them, your teacher could never have reached any of you. And they said, oh, yes, they could. If they wanted to reach one of us, they would just call out, girls, legs left. and we would swing our legs to the left. So keep your eyes on the bottom of the screen there and imagine somebody has just called out girls' legs left and see what happens. And you see, it's like the parting of the Red Sea, and now I can get down between them to reach a particular girl. But look how uncomfortable that looks. They're sitting on a narrow little bench, and those old benches were very narrow. They've got their back against a concrete wall. It's uncomfortable and crowded. And of course, sometimes it was bitterly cold. This pen and ink drawing here shows girls walking through thick snow. You may be aware that the first 2 winters of the war were exceptionally cold winters. And they're walking to the 3 entrances to the tunnels at the back of the school. You might just be able to see all 3 entrances on the left-hand side. One of them is almost off the picture. They had 3 entrances to each set of tunnels so they could all get in really quickly. But the girls in this picture have got hats on, coats on, gloves on, scarves on, boots on. And they must have had to carry that paraphernalia with them all the time because they never knew when they were going to be going down. And of course, there was no heating down there. And not only could it be really cold, it could also be really wet. Now, this is just a pencil sketch, but you can probably see drips coming from the ceiling, puddles on the floor. It still drips. It always has done. And of course, don't forget the floor is only earth. So when it puddles like this, it's actually muddy down there. So if you put all that together, uncomfortable, crowded, cold, wet, gloomy, airless and muddy, it really is not a nice place to be. And yet they kept on working down there. I really like this little painting here of the girl sitting on the benches down there working. And look at the girl on the left-hand side there. I've increased the size of her here so you can see her a little bit more clearly. She's obviously holding her book up to catch the light, and I completely understand because shadows fall all over the place when you're down there. So she's holding her book up so she can go on reading. I must share this with you, though. I was showing this painting recently to a primary school class, and I said to them, "So what's that girl doing?" And the little boy called out, "She's taking a selfie." And I find it very difficult now not to look at that picture and see someone taking a selfie. But as I say, I take my hat off to those teachers that they kept on working in those circumstances. I take my hat off to modern teachers as well. I think they've had a difficult job recently, but that must have been particularly difficult. They didn't go on working in every school when they got down in the tunnels. In some schools, they would just sing songs and tell stories. But the head teacher here was quite ferocious, and she insisted that they kept up with their ordinary lessons. And I know they did because the old girls have told me, but I also know it for a more interesting reason, which is that they've left some evidence down there. Now, this evidence is quite difficult to photograph. So in this next picture, I've put a modern schoolgirl on either side of the picture, but I wonder if you can see anything between them. So now you've got the scale from the 2 girls. I've gone a little bit closer. I don't know if you can make that out there. It's actually a quadratic equation, and it's been chalked on the walls down there for anything between 75 and 80 years. So if I was teaching down my tunnel, this would be on the wall immediately behind where I'd be standing. So at some point, the teacher has moved to one side and has used the wall behind her as a blackboard. That's why we've put a blackboard down there, so we can teach a lesson as it would have been taught, but we don't actually want to write on the walls. But they did. There are chalk marks all over the place. They're absolutely fascinating, these ghosts of lost lessons. I'll just share one other little detail with you. At one point, there's a little tiny addition sum, and it seems to say that 66 plus 26 makes 90. So we had a little chuckle and said, "Oh, somebody's made a mistake." Then I took the old girls down that day and I said to them, "Look, someone's made a mistake." "No, they haven't," they said. "What do you mean?" I said. 66 plus 26 makes 90. And they put their hands on their hips and looked at me very pityingly and said, "No, dear, it's shillings and pence, isn't it?" Which of course it was. 6 and 6 plus 2 and 6 makes 9 shillings. And on this page here, Miss Keane has done lots of little painted sketches of all the different subjects that could have been being taught down there at any one time. So you've got science and maths and history and music and RE and art and English. And as I say, I'm very impressed they kept on working. Lots of the girls remembered their lessons. I'd just like to read you 2 comments from them, which I rather liked. In my Latin class, we were translating a passage from Virgil in the Aeneid, the part dealing with the Trojan Wars. And we'd just come to the description of the Greeks emerging from the belly of the Trojan horse. when a line of bombs was dropped through the town, whoomph, whoomph, whoomph. And I couldn't help feeling how surreal that was, that there they were underground learning about an ancient war, while a modern war was going on above their heads at the very same moment. But this was my favourite comment. I remember being given the option of learning German or Latin. I chose German because I thought it would come in handy if we didn't win. But of course, going down into the tunnels was a very regular occurrence, and Miss Keane has done several paintings showing the girls rushing to the shelter during a raid. Now, when I went back to have a look at this one after I'd interviewed the old girls, I was a little bit puzzled by it, because the old girls had been very clear to say to me that they were not allowed to run. They had to walk. And yet the girls in this painting are very clearly running. So I showed it again to the old girls and said, so what's happening here then? And they said, oh, well, we were allowed to run if there were Messerschmitts and Dorniers immediately overhead. So I think Miss Keane must have painted an emergency moment here. And of course, she couldn't have been standing here sketching this at the time. She must have painted this from memory. And I think this is an emergency moment as well. This is just a very small detail from a much bigger painting. But the reason I've chosen to focus on this detail is that it's another wonderful example of Miss Keane's style. It's full of energy and movement and humour, with the pigtails and the gas mask flying, and the little girl at the back seat looks as though she's been completely swept off her feet. She does look very little, doesn't she? There was a junior school attached to the grammar school at the time, so I think she must have been a pupil there. But going down into the tunnels was a very regular occurrence, particularly during 1940 and 41. And there were lots of reasons for this. The Battle of Britain was fought in the skies overhead. Maidstone is not a safe place to be either, because if you look at a map, it's on a direct flight path from Germany to London. It has a barracks in the middle of it, so it's a garrison town. It's surrounded by airfields, and it's close to Chatham dockyards. So it was a very dangerous place to be. And on several days, the girls were going down and up and down and up and down and up more than once, often 2, 3, 4, even 5 times in a day. Often not for very long, half an hour, 45 minutes or so. There was one occasion where they remembered being down there for a consecutive 7 hours, but that was very unusual. It was much more common that they were going down and up several times in a day. But as I say, this was absolutely essential because of what was going on around them. And on several paintings, Miss Keane has painted what's going on in the school in 3/4 of the page, and then she has a little strip across the top showing what was going on in the sky above the school. So I've just gathered a few of those strips together. And here you can see a squadron of bombers coming over, smoke trails in the sky, a dogfight, a lone bomber, another dogfight, parachutists coming down the side of one of the pages. Maidstone was not a safe place to be, as is amply illustrated by this photograph here. Sorry, this one. This happened on the 31st of October 1940. And there were fatalities that day in the centre of town, as there were on many days in the town. This is in a little side street just off the main high street. So I did ask the girls if they were frightened by all this. And I had a whole variety of answers, but the most common answer I had was that they were often more frightened at home than they ever were at school, because their parents tended to show their fear, whereas the teachers hid theirs. I would imagine they were instructed to. And of course, they were surrounded by their friends at school. And anyway, these girls were only children, really, and children have an amazing capacity to find things exciting. And a lot of them told me that quite often they were looking forward to the all clear, particularly if they were at home, so that they could go rushing out to pick up any shrapnel that had fallen and add to their collections, which they then swapped with their neighbours' children. And I was just about to leave one old girl's house when she said, "Oh, Mary, I've forgotten to show you something." And she went back into the kitchen and brought this out. Now, I don't know if you can understand that photograph. She's showing me something on the flat of her hand. And what she's showing me is a completely see-through plastic ring. "Well," she said, "during the war, I had a boyfriend, Bob, and Bob loved me to bits. And he went out one day shrapnel hunting, and he came back with a fragment from the smashed perspex windscreen of a plane. And he brought it back and he fashioned it into a ring for me, and he shaped it like an engagement ring. And he etched or scratched Bob on one side and my initials on the other. And some of you just might be able to see the letter M to the right-hand side of the wider bit of the ring there. And she said, he told me he would love me always. He told me he would love me forever. In fact, he told me he would love me till eternity. So, of course, I said, Molly, what happened to Bob? As soon as the war was over, she said, he buggered off to Australia, didn't he? But she has kept the ring all these years, and I would love to have tracked Bob down, but unfortunately she couldn't remember his surname, so I haven't yet managed to find him. This is rather a lovely painting too. It is exactly as it says, Dinner in the Trenches 1940. Trenches is the word the girls used to describe the tunnels. And if they were down there before the lunch hour came around, the lunch was brought down to them and served out underground. And that's what you can see going on the left-hand side there, a thick soup being served out. But look at all the detail here. On the bench by the soup, you can see some bread rolls, a spoon, a glove. On the floor, another glove, a jug, a gas mask and a case. On the opposite side of the tunnel, some books, another gas mask, a lantern. Then there's another lantern on the wall and a light bulb a little bit further along, which suggests to me they continued to take the lanterns down even after the electricity was put in case the supply failed. And under the benches, you've got more gas masks and satchels and cases. And of course, they're all the girls' coats and scarves. Miss Keane did a lot of paintings of the lunch hour. I think she had the opportunity to paint during her free time. And I understand she would, or rather the opportunity to sketch. And I understand she would walk around school with a pencil and sketch pad during the day. And then she would take her pencil sketches home to paint in watercolours in the evenings. I'll just show you one other of her lunchtime paintings, which is one of my favourites of her pictures. And it shows two teachers who've got tired having their backs against the cold concrete wall. So they've gone back to back, swung their legs up on the bench, and the lady in the front is both knitting and reading, and she has her handbag on her legs and a cup of tea on the floor. Now, all this time, the King's Warren girls were still there. And this is the only photograph I have that I know is of them. And they're having a picnic on the North Downs in the summer holidays of 1941. But eventually, London County Council came to visit and decided that Maidstone was not a safe place to be, as of course it hadn't been for the 2 years they'd already been there. In fact, they'd been there in the worst times. So in September 41, these girls were put back on trains and re-evacuated to Bedford, and they saw out the rest of the war there. But what slightly intrigues me about that is that it was obviously considered too dangerous to be in Maidstone if you were a Plumstead girl, but apparently not too dangerous if you were a Maidstone girl, because they weren't evacuated anywhere. But it's a good job that this lot were evacuated from Plumstead, because this is what happened to their school building. That's how they found it when they returned to Plumstead at the end of the war. Now, I wonder how many of you can remember, as I can, little third pint bottles of milk at school. Well, they were delivered to the schools as normal at the beginning of the war, but in November 41, the Board of Education wrote to schools to say they could no longer afford the manpower to fill the little bottles. So they said they were going to have to send the milk into schools in much bigger containers. And it was up to the teachers to measure out a third of a pint per child. But unhelpfully, they didn't send the little bottles. Instead, they sent a great long instruction about how you could hold a ruler up against a jug and measure it out like that. Now, don't bother to read the instruction, but Miss Keane has written it out at the bottom of this painting. But what she has illustrated here is what the queue would have looked like had they followed this instruction. So on the right-hand side there, you've got the teacher in her fur coat doing the measuring with the ruler and the jug. And then the queue goes all the way across the front of the painting, round the end, and all the way up the back again as well. And it looks as though there's thick snow on the ground too. Well, Kent Education Committee saw this problem, and in their wisdom, they decided to send along great big barrels of dried milk powder to the schools, huge great barrels. I don't think Miss Keane was very impressed with that either. What you can see here on the left is a cook being attached to a wire, and then there's a pulley in the ceiling. And then on the right-hand side, she's being winched up to scoop some of this powder out of these huge stacked barrels. I'm absolutely certain this never happened. I think this is just Miss Keane's illustration of what it would have looked like if they tried to get into these huge stacked barrels of milk, which I don't think they ever bothered to do actually during the war. But I'm going to take a big leap forward here. We're going forward to 1944. And there was another nasty thing to happen in this area, which was the arrival of the buzz bombs, later called doodlebugs, that started coming over in June of that year. And again, Kent was a very dangerous place to be in this time. You may know that these pilotless flying bombs often were a little bit short of fuel, so they didn't reach their target and would fall short of London onto Kent. Also, the RAF pilots used to go up and try and tip the wings of the doodlebugs to make them fall before they reached London. So again, it was a dangerous time in the county. And Miss Keane has illustrated a new duty in this period, a new duty for teachers and the older girls. She's done it on a full-page cartoon strip. I won't show you the full page because it would be too tiny to see the detail, but this is just a section of that full page, about 2/5 of the whole page. So what you can see here is a senior girl on this new duty, Doodlebug Lookout duty. So she's obviously got a free period and she's been sent to sit outside the front of the school on Doodlebug watch. And there she is in the top left-hand corner working. And then in the second frame, she gets up, thinks she's heard something, looks, listens, yes, definitely. Bottom left-hand corner, drops her book, runs inside. I love the 7th frame here where you can see her shoe just disappearing around the corner. And there she is in the last frame, ringing the school bell. So they're no longer waiting for the air raid siren now. They're listening out for the school bell to be rung in a certain way. And when they heard it, they would go rushing down into the shelter. But of course, pretty quickly, they worked out that was pointless because they hadn't all got down there before the doodlebug had either flown over and vanished or had crashed somewhere. So the new instruction became, if you hear the bell rung like that, take your books, get under the desk, the teacher does the same, and the lesson continues on the floor. Now, amazingly, I've actually managed to track this girl down who's featured in this painting here. She remembers Miss Keane sketching her, and she says she has actually taken a bit of a liberty because on that particular day, she wasn't reading a book. She was actually doing her school certificate exam, and they had to go under the desk a couple of times during the course of the exam. And she also told me that the rule was make sure your head is under the desk, but don't worry too much about your bottom, which I think is quite well illustrated there. But of course, we're getting on towards the end of the war. And this next painting I'm showing you is really the opposite of a painting that I showed you at the beginning, because it shows teachers in the staff room pulling the sticky netting off the windows. And some of you may just be able to see a little line of writing right down at the bottom. Don't worry if you can't, which says VE day -1, 8:30 approximately. So these teachers have obviously stayed in school the evening before VE day to do this job, to pull this sticky netting off the windows. And in the next painting in Miss Keane's book, we can see the girls doing exactly the same job. And this one is VE day +2, so 2 days after VE day. And it looks as though they've put their science overalls on and they've gone all around the classrooms, climbing on the desks and radiators and windowsills, pulling the sticky netting off the windows. Now, a lot of the girls that I spoke to remembered doing this job, and they actually told me how much they loved it. They said they'd never enjoyed cleaning windows as much since. I think that was because, if you remember, this school was built for sunshine, and over all these war years, this horrible sticky netting had muted the sunlight, prevented it really coming into the school. And so they were desperate to get it off at the end of the war, almost like a symbolic gesture, and let the sunlight back in again. And for the same reason, they were very anxious to get these ugly baffle walls down as well, because they had also kept the sunlight out. And the quickest way to do that was for fathers and daughters to work together. So in this painting here, you can see them doing exactly that. Over on the left-hand side there, you've got the fathers taking the wall down, and then they're handing their bricks along to the girls on the right. And then you might just be able to spot in the bottom right-hand corner, it says PTO, and this whole page opens out so that the girl there on the right is handing her bricks onto the girl there on the left, and so on right across the page. You might also be able to spot another PTO there, but rather sadly, this folded piece of paper has been glued into the book. So actually, at the moment, we haven't been able to get at the very last picture in that sequence. But I get the impression that Miss Keane was very impressed with the fathers and daughters to paint that chain of effort. I don't think she was quite so impressed with the contracted labour. Can you see in this painting here, we've got two workmen who are definitely not getting on with the job in hand. It looks very much as though they're leaning up against the half-demolished wall, watching the girls walk past. I have wondered whether these two men are prisoners of war, because there was a prisoner of war camp close to the school, and also over on the left-hand side there, it looks as though there's a soldier in his brown uniform on guard sitting on the wheelbarrow. but I'm not actually quite sure about that detail. But Miss Keene had not lost her sense of humour. This next pencil sketch I'm showing you is labelled Milk Powder Plot, 1946. And it's obviously a la gunpowder plot, and it shows the barrels of completely unused milk powder, which have been stacked up and stuffed into a cupboard. And in the 3.5 years that it had been sitting there, it had solidified into rock. So this is what they had to do with it. Can you see over on the right-hand side there, they've taken a pickaxe to hack the barrel open with. And then on the left-hand side, they've imported the roller from the playing field to return the milk to powder again. I hope to throw away, but I'm a little bit disconcerted by those 2 bowls in the foreground there, as if they really are collecting the milk powder, and also by the fact they've bothered to put a cloth over it while they roller it. So maybe they were going to use that stale milk powder. There's one other little detail I love about this particular painting, and that is this is Miss Keene, the art teacher, painting this. And look what she's painted through the blue doors there. She's painted the girls' artwork on the walls in the corridor, which I think is rather a lovely detail. And this next picture I'm showing you is the very last picture in Miss Keene's book, and it shows, or tells us it shows, the demolition of the tunnels in 1948. Now, when I first came across this painting, I was really puzzled because, of course, we'd just uncovered a completely intact set of tunnels at the back of the school. We do know we are very, very lucky to have those, because whereas virtually all the secondary schools in the area had these tunnels dug for them, they have almost all been absolutely completely destroyed. So there's not even a remnant left. So we do know we are lucky because they're such a wonderful educational resource. But it just meant that I was puzzled by this picture. But then I looked again and I thought, no, this is Miss Keene, the accurate artist, painting here. And those trees there are the deciduous trees at the front of the school. So I came to the conclusion that they had demolished the tunnels at the front of the school, but for some reason, fortunately for us, had forgotten the set at the back. And that's what I thought for about 3-4 years or so. But then last January, just before lockdown started, the first lockdown, a local archaeological society contacted the school. They'd obviously heard about this project somewhere and asked if they could come and do a survey of the grassy area at the front. Well, just to see if there was any remnant of these tunnels left there. Well, I actually said to them, really, honestly, I wouldn't bother, because not only is there no visible entrance, unlike there had been at the back of the school, but also, look, we've got this painting here showing the tunnels being destroyed. Well, let's come and have a look anyway, they said. So they came and had a look, did their survey, and to my absolute amazement, told me that there is another set of 6 tunnels zigzagging away under the grass at the front of the school. Well, this is absolutely extraordinary. So, of course, you can probably imagine my next question, which was, can we break through? Well, in this photograph here, you can probably make out in that little group of people there on both the left and right hand sides of the group, there's a man holding a shovel, and they have just finished digging this hole down in the foreground there, which gives you some idea about how far underground the tunnels are. Not very far underground, they've just hit the top of the tunnels there. And then right in the foreground there, of course, you can see one of the archaeologists lowering himself down into the tunnels. Now, this photograph was taken last July, and sadly, of course, lockdown intervened. So this is just about as far as we have got. We have not yet managed to complete. We have actually started, but we have not completed the new set of steps going down into this new set of tunnels. So for health and safety reasons, I have not yet been allowed to go down, and I'm very frustrated about that. But of course, on this particular day, this archaeologist did go down, and he did take with him a camera. And this is one of his photographs here. And as you can probably see here, this tunnel looks in very, very good condition indeed. That pile of concrete at the end, we think is the remnants of a set of steps that came down into the tunnels at that point. So I've come to the conclusion that that painting of Miss Keene's shows the tunnels being blocked up rather than them being demolished. And I was intrigued here also to see no evidence of a dado rail here. And I have wondered, therefore, whether the dado rail was only put in the tunnels at the back of the school because they were so damp, to help the girls keep their backs off the damp wall, whereas this tunnel doesn't look really damp at all, or not very much anyway. And there's one other little detail that you can see in this picture. Right in the top right-hand corner, right at the top, you can see one of the metal hooks on the walls from which the lanterns would have hung. And if you've got very good eyesight, you might just be able to spot another one about 3/4 of the way down the opposite wall. Well, the archaeologist who went down this day, he walked the 6 tunnels and told me that there are chalk lessons all over the walls down here as well. So, of course, I am desperate to get down there to have a look. But even more tantalizingly than that, he told me that at one point there are some drawings on the walls, and he took just one photograph. Now, I don't know if you can make this out. This is a floor-to-ceiling drawing of a woman. Very 1940s in style, both her hairdo and her outfit, I feel. And it's really quite a sophisticated drawing as well. So I can't help wondering if Miss Keane was at work underground there during an air raid, drawing on the walls. And of course, I'm even more desperate to get down there and have a jolly good look. Now, I think it's at this point that I really ought to come clean and admit that I am actually not a historian. I'm not a history teacher at all. I'm an English teacher. But being involved in this project has not only been an enormous privilege, but it has taught me a couple of things about history. You'll have to forgive me, they're very obvious lessons, but they have come home very powerfully to me through this project. And the first of those is how wonderful it is if you can speak to people who actually lived through a historical event and gather that oral record. Talking to those old girls was amazing. I have only just scraped the surface this evening of all the things they told me. And the second lesson, equally obvious, is how wonderful it is if you can get hold of a really good visual record. So as a last slide here, I've just put up 4 of the paintings I've already shown you, 4 of my personal favourites of Miss Keane's paintings. And I am just so grateful to her that she took the time and trouble to create these lovely paintings, and so sad for her that I don't think after the war that anybody was interested in them. I think they were just shoved into the box, shoved into the cupboard and forgotten about. But of course, for us to discover them now, well, it was like finding a treasure trove. Now, I hope you don't mind my mentioning the fact that the book about this is for sale. It's got all the paintings I've shown you this evening, all in full colour, and all the ones I haven't had time for as well. And it's £10 a copy with £2 postage, so £12 in total. And half the profit from the sale of the books is the only method the school has to fund this whole project. And you may be aware that schools don't have money for this sort of extra anymore. So the sale of the books will pay for the extra steps going in, subsidise the primary visits, maintain the tunnels, and we're also creating a 1940s classroom. The books can be bought by bank card through the school website, so I've put that at the top there. And then just in case anyone's interested in buying a book but would rather pay by cheque or bank transfer, I've just put my email address there, and you're very welcome to email me for those details. The only advert I'd make for the book is that I have absolutely loved sharing it with my 7 and 9-year-old grandsons as well. It's been a lovely way to teach them about or introduce them to this bit of history, because of course they go to school. So it's explaining the war in relation to something that they already experience. So if anyone would like to buy a copy, that would be absolutely lovely. But please let me reassure you, if nobody wants to buy a copy, that is also absolutely fine. And I would just like to finish by saying thank you very much indeed for listening to me. And I'm very happy to answer any questions if there are any. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, Mary, what can I say? Well, delightful presentation using some superb pictures. For what to tell us about what must have been quite a scary time for folks, based on how you've described Maidstone's location on the flight path, etc. Hopefully there's some questions. Please do fire them through on the screen. But I've got 1 or 2 to ask you, Mary, as you might imagine. Perhaps dealing with the worst case first. What was the school ever hit? Were any of the tunnels ever subject to bombs at all?
No, I mean, they were very fortunate that they never did take a direct hit. I don't think those tunnels would have protected them from a direct hit at all. They would have protected them from falling masonry, but not from a direct hit. But the school is sandwiched between Maidstone's two railway lines. They actually border the site literally on either side, and the two railway lines were hit on more than one occasion. So on those days, the school lost some glass from their windows and also a few tiles from the roof. But no, it never actually did take a direct hit, unlike the Plumstead school.
Mm.
So they were very fortunate about that.
Mm. You did mention early on about the children from Plumstead being evacuated, and later said that those from Maidstone never were. But presumably, no one gave any thought to it could be dangerous.
Well,
People out of London.
It obviously was dangerous. I know at the beginning of the war, some very odd decisions were made. I mean, they evacuated some children to Folkestone and some other to Birkenhead, neither of which were very safe places either. But no, they never did evacuate the children from Maidstone. One or two children were evacuated privately by their families, but for some reason they never did decide Maidstone was dangerous enough for them to be evacuated.
Mm.
I just mentioned the railway line that borders the school a moment ago. I'd just like to tell you a little anecdote relating to that as well. During the war, the girls had a lot of war work to do, as you can probably imagine. And I was very amused that one of the jobs, about 14-year-olds were given, what would be now year 9 in school, was to go down to the railway line at the back of the school to pick stinging nettles to be made into soup. And they were told always to go in groups of 3. And the reason they were told to go in groups of 3 was that 2 of them would pick the nettles, and the third girl's job was to act as a lookout for trains. And I can't help feeling that that's a very different approach to health and safety than we would have nowadays.
Yeah, yes, very much so. You said you got in touch. I think it was with 54 old girls, as you call them.
Yes.
And some went down the tunnels. Were they all, most of them, still reasonably local, or had they moved all over the place?
Oh no, they'd moved. I mean, there were a lot that were local, a lot local to Kent anyway, not particularly to Maidstone, but we did contact 1 or 2 in America and Australia. So of course those interviews were done either by email or by phone, but they were all over the country. It was very rewarding talking to them, and I think a lot of them actually really did love reliving the experience and feel very chuffed to have their quotations or anecdotes in our book. And also to know that the book is in the research room of the Imperial War Museum now. So other people are using their memories as part of their research. So it was a lovely thing to do, to interview them, and a great privilege as well.
I suppose it goes to show how all our lives move on, in that from about 70 years from them being shut to you effectively discovering them, nobody had really come forward to question it. People had just moved on with their lives, yes. I suppose.
Well, it's amazing that a lot of girls who've come back to the school, not from the wartime, from later on, when they've heard about this story, they said, well, I never knew the tunnels were there. And I've said to them, well, didn't you ever notice that a set of steps going down, this one had these lumps of concrete in front? And they said, well, yes, vaguely, but they don't seem to have had any curiosity about what was down there. But yes, it was a real privilege to open them up. And so many previous pupils from the school have come back to have a look down there. Yes, forgive me referring to them as old girls, by the way. It sounds very patronizing, I know, but it is in fact what they call themselves.
Yeah, that's fine. Did when you're obviously showing some of the former pupils, some of the paintings that have been done, apart from the one under the desk, did any of them recognise themselves?
I think that was the only one where anybody knew for certain it was them. Although they certainly recognised the things that were going on in the pictures. And of course, talking to them helped me enormously to interpret the paintings, because, you know, the detail I've been able to give you now is often detail that I've acquired from the old girls. You know, for example, that pencil sketch showing the curtain. No, it was a painting actually showing the curtain at the side of the tunnel. I had no idea what was in that little room there because there's nothing left now. There are actually 2 rusty curtain rails in the ceiling, but we didn't put 2 and 2 together and realise those must be toilets there. But it was the old girls who explained that to us, and also who filled us in on some of the details that we can't get from just the experience of looking down in the tunnels, and that is how claustrophobic and airless the tunnels became after, when there were 180 girls sitting in there, sometimes for an hour, and there was no ventilation in the tunnels. They were far in front of each of the doors, on the inside of each of the doors, there was a thick gas curtain that would be lowered once they were inside. And if there'd been a gas attack, it would have been soaked in water. There was a bucket of water at the side. And the reason I'm telling you that is that it showed me that they were far more frightened about the possibility of letting gas into the tunnels than they were worried about making sure that fresh air could get in. So there was actually no provision for ventilation. Which means that, of course, they got very, very airless and fetid and can't have smelt very nice down there. And that's the sort of thing that we can't recreate. So it's really lovely that the old girls were able to fill us in on the details there.
And I suppose Miss Keane's paintings give almost a bit of an adventure to the experience, rather than what you've just described as what the reality must have been like.
Yes, well, and I think she had a very strong sense of humour. I mean, obviously, I've not been able to show you all the paintings, but there's a whole series of them which poke fun at the instructions sent out to schools. So she was quite able to take a little sardonic view of all those instructions and illustrate them like that. Like the one with the teacher the cook being winched up to scoop out the milk powder. I'm sure that never happened.
Well, yeah, but makes a smile, doesn't it?
It does.
You mentioned obviously that effectively her pictures and much of the story was shut away in the archives room come the end of the war. Did you ever find out what happened to her?
We did eventually. We knew nothing about her to begin with, but in about 2016, we managed to track down her nephew. And he told us that she never married, she never had any children, so she doesn't have any direct descendants. She stayed teaching all her career, all in Kent, although she moved to Gravesend at the end. He told us she was born in 1912, so she was only 27 when the war began, and I think that's quite a mature thing to do, to set out to document the war like that. And he also told us rather poignantly that she didn't die until 2005, and I was rather saddened by that. We'd rather hoped we were going to find her alive. We did think that was unlikely, but to learn that she only died in 2005, it felt very poignant that we'd really only just missed her. And I would love to have been able to tell her how much we appreciate her paintings now, when immediately after the war, I think nobody was interested. But the nice thing was we were able to show her nephew how much we appreciated her paintings, and he was absolutely delighted that we were doing something with them. So that felt very nice.
Well, people have stayed around while we've been chatting, but I've not seen any questions, so I guess we're getting to the point at which, if there aren't any, then we'll probably draw this to a close. But I mean, I just in your highlights of the talk, you've captivated me. I mean, you must have been incredibly excited, chuffed, whatever the words are, when you came across all this and could unveil it in your book and then in your talks. I can't imagine how you must have felt.
No, it's been a real privilege. I do feel very privileged. I mean, to have this land in my lap as I retired was absolutely fabulous. So I do feel very lucky indeed.
Yeah. Right. Well, I've not prompted any questions, so I'm sorry about that, Mary. But I can only think that they've been completely blown away by the story, and I think it's absolutely delightful. And I hope you continue to share it with people of all ages in the coming years, and hopefully we have some members who will invest in your book and hope it continues to be a success. So what I would just say to people is thank you again, Mary. We're unable, as you can tell, to give you a round of applause, which you would have got, and probably a standing ovation if you'd have been here live. So as always, I ask people who've listened in either tonight or in the days to come, because many people do that, to send in emails showing their appreciation of your talk. And indeed, if they have any questions or points to make, obviously pass them on to you. I would also like to, I don't do this often enough, is to thank Moo Gerbert, who arranges all our speakers, for tracking you down and including you in our program. It's been an absolute delight. So thank you again for that. Just to say that our next meeting takes place on May the 19th, when Bernard Lockett will be talking about the heritage of Gilbert and Sullivan. In the meantime, keep well, everybody. Start venturing out and enjoying yourselves, but safely. Keep an eye on emails so that we can keep you up to date with what's going on within Beccles U3A, and see you next time. Many thanks again. Bye.
Bye-bye.